We acknowledge, honor, and respect that many of us are located on the traditional unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples of Canada. Welcome to another episode of Veg Networking Canada, where vegan plant-based companies connect and collaborate. Today we have a very special guest who was previously a mechanical engineer with a strong ability for analytical problem-solving skills, which he still uses to this day. He holds family values to the highest degree, and he is an entrepreneur with a deep compassion for animal welfare. Veg Networking Canada is pleased to introduce the co-owner of Planted, the team behind Planted Expo, Jonny Ostojic. Welcome, Jonny.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're so thrilled to start with our first question for you, which is more of a personal one for a lot of folks, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about your spark and your vegan plant-based origin story?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting story. I grew up in like a Central Eastern European household. My parents immigrated from the former Yugoslavia, Serbia. And we grew up eating meat at every meal, sometimes more than one type of meat at every meal. My business partner Steven jokes, one of the things I hear him repeat is he ate enough meat in the first 18 years of his life to last him his whole life, And a similar thing with me, just you name it, we had it. And so it wasn't like I was born or raised into that. I was always kind of I remember being a really picky meat eater. I ate chicken, but I wanted only chicken breast because it was the cleaner, easier to stomach meat type of thing. But I never even, I used to, I don't know if I ever would make fun of vegetarians and vegans, but I remember actively thinking that was never something that was on my radar or something that I would ever consider for my life. My wife likes to remind me that I had a t-shirt in college that said, "Say plants eat meat." And she has a picture of me wearing it that she'll randomly pull out every once in a while. And it's so yeah, very much, that was the way I was raised and enjoyed my meat, enjoyed my food, my animal products and my food. So when I was freshly out of college, a couple of years out of college, I had the opportunity to move to China for a short time for work. And I jumped on the opportunity. I love travel. I'd lived abroad once before and I wanted to do it again. And I got there and I remember thinking okay, China, they don't speak English. It's going to be a little bit harder for me to manage and make sure I only get the meats that I want and stuff. And so the first meal, we get off the plane, we're hungry, we go to sit down at a restaurant and I ordered a chicken meal. It was chicken and rice, something or other. And it came and it was literally like rice and some veggies and then a pile of chicken feet. And that's not they had pictures, in the menu. I certainly didn't choose the chicken feet, but I just remember thinking there's 0% chance of eating that. And I'm okay, so I guess I might have to go vegetarian while I'm here, just to I don't want to deal with this time and time again and go hungry and this and that. And I discovered it's actually really easy to be vegetarian in a place like China. They do eat a lot of vegetables and that sort of thing. So I spent 6 months there and I went vegetarian while I was there. I was I'm just not dealing with that. It's easier to go vegetarian. So I did that. And, I never really cooked a lot of meat at home. I did it sometimes, even while we were there. There was meat at the store, but it's just I'm just going to go vegetarian for 6 months. It's just easier and it wasn't a big deal. And I had full intention of resuming life as normal when I got back to Canada and the States. And so I got back home and I went to my mom's house and she prepared a meal and I had meat and I sat there and I was eating it and I was just there was this we all talk, I think many of us vegans talk about the cognitive dissonance of what it is that people's food is. I was just sitting there struggling. I was trying to eat this and I was struggling to do it. It's just it was very obvious. The texture of it is very obvious to me in a way that it never had been. This is flesh. This is something I was struggling with it. And so I just decided, I think I'm just going to stick vegetarian. I'm just going to stay I'm going to eat vegetarian for a while and see how that goes. And I did. I stayed vegetarian for another 7 years, I think it was, somewhere in there. I remember I tried a few more times, like in the 6 months after getting back home. And I remember the last meat that I ate was at Thanksgiving. I had turkey, and I was like, I just can't do this anymore. I gave it up. And it was interesting. Like, I started to tell myself, well, yeah, it's better for the animals anyways. Animals don't have to die for you to have milk and cheese, and I still ate eggs, and I did that for a long time. And then, as that cognitive dissonance as I had to really start to think about it, as I did start to think about it, it just started. I was less and less comfortable with all of it, and as I contemplated the reasons why it was making me uncomfortable, and I started exploring what those logical conclusions were, I started to realize, like, this makes sense, And I had a few people in my life who were already vegan, and I'd had some conversations with one of those being my current business partner, Steven Markovich. He had gone fully vegan years before I did. He did it for health reasons initially, but then since then, it's one of those things that's interesting, right? As I'm sure we've all experienced, there's so many angles that draw you into the plant-based and vegan lifestyle. And once you're there, you start to really realize, like, the benefits for everything, for your health, if you're there for health, great. There's good reasons to do that. If you're there for animal compassion animal rights reasons, obviously there's good reasons to do that too. If you're there for environmental reasons, there's good reasons to do that. And so, it was just a gradual thing. Like, it wasn't like I woke up one day and I said, okay, I've been vegetarian for long enough, I'm going to be vegan. I just started slowly cutting out what was left, right? And I struggled with cheese. Like, eggs, I didn't struggle with too much giving up. So every once in a while, I'd miss eggs. Cheese I struggled with. And, there was good reasons for that. Casomorphine, like, once you start diving into the reasons why, for example, something like cheese is difficult to give up, it's interesting what you learn. But yeah, so it's just a very gradual process. And then one day I realized, like, I haven't had any animal products in a couple of weeks now, and I'm not dead, and I'm not protein deprived, and I'm not, and I'm fine. And I didn't really, so it's just a very natural progression. I mean, it was a hard line to vegetarian, and then just a slow tapering off to fully vegan, until one day I woke up and just said, you know what, I'm done. Like, I don't need it. I don't need any of those things in my life. I'm better off without them. The world is better off without them. And so that was just kind of how it happened. And that was, 4 or 5 years ago now. So.
Wow. Well, it's really nice, I think, for a lot of folks to hear that story and hear more of those stories, because people might think that it is black and white, super extreme, super challenging and difficult, and all these different reasons. So to hear that story, we would imagine gives people some comfort and confidence in maybe kind of trusting their gut if that's been in their gut before. And we could take this, and for the whole hour we could talk about how fascinating cognitive dissonance is. But we'll save that for another time. So switching gears, going from a mechanical engineer background to now co-owner of a plant-based empire events business. What's that story like? When did you become an entrepreneur? How did that unfold for you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the entrepreneurial spirit and bug has kind of always been there to some extent for me. Like, I grew up, my dad is an electrician. He's a one-man business. Like, he's self-employed, one-man business. And I grew up working summers with him and kind of watching him operate. And so that this whole concept of being in charge of your own destiny, and like going and hustling and working hard and making things happen, and not just allowing others to tell you what needs to be done to make things happen, that sort of thing. That seemed very natural to me because I grew up in that type of environment. And like I have many like first cousins who also became electricians and went into business for themselves and did very well. I knew that wasn't for me, but the entrepreneurial, the whole like being in charge of your own destiny and all that was very much something that I grew up with and knew. I didn't think I was going to do it immediately out of school, but I always kind of wanted to explore that and knew like that was likely in my future. I read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek way back, like when it came out, and that was pretty influential on me. Like some of those ideas I still think about pretty regularly. Just there's some really good ideas in there about like, for example, figuring out what to be afraid of and what the worst case scenarios likely are, and how to navigate through those risks. And so there's some interesting things there. I ended up doing a few like little side projects. I did a Kickstarter and created a product that I sold for a while. It was a motorcycle accessory. And I actually started a little small business selling a few motorcycle accessories for a time, and it did okay. And I made a few bucks, but it wasn't like a quit my job and do this type of thing. But I got a taste for it. And then I thought I was going to start going down the real estate investing route, actually. So I'd moved around a little bit and had always tried to like buy and hold as I moved. So I had a few properties that I'd had for about 10 years that I was piling up, and then was gonna sell everything and then buy like a small apartment building and start moving up into multifamily investing. And I did. So I started selling off the I only had 2 or 3 properties. So it wasn't like I had 20 of them, but I'd held them for a while and there was some equity, and I sold those. And I was actively like looking for apartments. I was like getting coaching education and like the whole apartment syndication, all this other stuff. I was going down this path. And then Steven, my business partner, called me up one day and said, "Hey, I had this really interesting opportunity fall into my lap." He knew the former owners it was Veg Expo at the time. And he had been involved with the event in various capacities almost every year from the beginning. And he was like, "They're looking to sell," and they offered me the first right of refusal, basically. And I immediately knew like this is something I want to be involved in, and I didn't know how. And I knew I wanted to support him and make it happen for him, and have some level of involvement. I didn't know what that meant, and that was on a Sunday. Like we talked for hours that weekend, and the next morning I found out. Like I was working as a mechanical engineer, I had a 9-to-5 job. Walked into work the next morning and found out the office was closing and I was losing my job. I was like, okay. And I also had just sold like 2 houses and had the money like sitting there waiting to deploy into something else. And so I was like, it's time. Like, now's the time to try this, right? Like the stars are lining up for me. That's what I thought. And so I was like, let's do this. And then we seriously talked about it. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. Let's do this. And we bought the business. And that was in January. That was like the very last week of January of 2020. About 10 minutes before the world shut down. So about a few weeks before the world shut down. So yeah. So I mean, we took it over. We were supposed to have an event June of, I think it was June 8th. June 9th it was supposed to be of 2020. And then in March, all events were, the world shut down and all events were scrapped indefinitely. And everybody was thinking like, oh my goodness, this thing could last 8 weeks. And it ended up lasting a few weeks longer than that. But yeah, so it was an interesting transition. But really what sucked me in was just knowing that like, I had been wrestling with the idea for a few years now, or towards the end of my role as an engineer for that business. Like, I actually really enjoyed my job. It was creative. I got to design some fun things. I was designing kitchen tools It's kind of random, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. But it didn't feel meaningful. Like, it's not like I dreaded Mondays or going into the office. I didn't. I liked what I did. I liked the people I worked with. But at the end of the day, I didn't feel like I was doing something meaningful. Like I wasn't making a difference in the world. And that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with me. Like I wanted to make a difference. And that, to be honest, transitioning to veganism is one of the things that really made me contemplate that concept of like, you know, every time I go to the supermarket, every time I buy clothes, everything I do, I'm voting with my dollars. I'm making a difference. I'm making the decisions I make matter, you know, and over time that compiles and you're moving the needle somewhere, like you're a cog in some machine somewhere, but you have to decide which machine you're a cog in. And it just started to weigh on me, like, I need to be doing something with meaning in my life. And then this opportunity came and I was like, I'm in. And it's not like we sat there and we're contemplating like, what business can, you know, what trade show business can we start? That wasn't it at all. It was just like, and I wouldn't have bought any other trade show business. It's just that this one specifically it just resonated so much with what I believe in and what so many of my core values and worldview was, you know, and is. So.
Well, that's again a second answer that is hopefully inspiring folks if they have a gut feeling of, you know, they're in a position and they might not like where they're at, but it doesn't have that oomph, it doesn't have that purpose driven behind it. And, you know, that's a great story to encourage folks to follow that sort of gut feeling again. And it's also the second time that you've mentioned how important it is to have people sort of on your side or in your corner on your team and have that close support system. It doesn't need to be a lot of people, just 1, 2, 3 people. Okay, so you're in the trade show business. There's more to it, right? There's education, there's a lot that goes to it. And then not only are you in the trade show business, you're in the whole plant-based ecosystem of trade shows. So with that being said, what are some trends in your industry, which has, to your point, been shaken up completely since the 2020? So what are some trends in your industry?
Yeah, I thought about this. There's a lot of different ways you could approach that question. If I view my industry as like events and trade shows, or if I view my industry as just being immersed in the plant-based world, they're completely different answers, right? I think the world is still figuring out events right now, like, and we're in the midst of that. Obviously, COVID wreaked havoc on the industry, and but I still very much, you know, myself and my business partner, we very much believe that there's a need that people have to gather together, and you know, whether it's a concert or like whatever it is, when you surround yourself with like-minded people who are there and passionate about the same thing as you know, go to a concert, go to a motorsports race, go to an event, go to a festival, whatever it is, there's an energy there. There's something that, and you can't really replicate it in a virtual setting, like not fully. There's components, but anyways, sorry, I'm kind of drifting off into the weeds here, but the whole plant-based world right now is just exploding. Like we all know this, right? It's almost hard to narrow down one like trend. So if I'm approaching the question from like just being that, like setting aside the fact that we are at events that we put on expos, really what we're trying to do, that's the method that we use to further the plant-based movement, to highlight what these businesses are doing, right? So to me, the trends are simply like people are out there innovating. They're solving needs. We have real problems as a society and as a planet that need solving. And there are people out there, there are social enterprises, there are people who are taking these audacious tasks and problems and tackling them and taking them down. And I think like one of the big ones coming down the pipeline that I'm actually struggling with how to handle professionally in terms of the way we're going to handle is a trend will be cultured and synthetic meats. Because I very much believe the reasons why I believe so strongly in what we're doing is because it contributes to the solutions to these problems that I'm talking about that we have as a society and as a planet. And there's a part of me that wants to say, like, I would love to just say, to denormalize like the concept of animals as food, for example. I would love to do that. People don't look at a dog and think of a dog as meat, but people look at a pig and think of it as bacon, right? But they're way more alike than they are different. And as much as I would love to snap my fingers and say, guess what? Nobody should think of any animal as meat. That's not going to happen. Like, it's just not going to happen. What will drive change, what will drive behavioral change, these companies like Impossible and Beyond, and now the actual like culture products that are going to be coming down the pipeline, those are actually going to make a difference. Less animals will suffer and die. Less problematic greenhouse gases will be produced. They're going to start contributing to these solutions. But it's hard, right? Like, we're a vegan plant-based event. Am I bringing in synthetic lab-grown meat to my event? It's hard. There's some gray areas. So, but that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. I went to a plant-based conference there's a business-to-business conference in New York. But that's one of the big talking points and one of the big points of discussion. You're seeing more and more articles come out about that sort of thing. So that's an example of a trend. And it's not just meat. They're now synthesizing casein and doing like real ice cream and milk and all these things out of synthetic or synthesized, essentially like on a molecular level, animal products, but they're not from an animal. So yeah, so that's a trend that has some interesting implications that we're going to have to sort through sooner than later for us.
Yeah, absolutely. From like a VC investor standpoint, that's definitely like a super hot button trend, is that so cultured dairy, cultured animal meat conversation. It sounds like, reading between the lines, some trends that you're kind of picking up on are super nuanced, and they're hard, I think, to like a lot of trends, right? You can extrapolate the data. I think what you're talking about is harder to do, and it's based around like behavioral change, cognitive dissonance, language, perception, and all of these like really important but hard to measure like underlying trends, which again, we could talk about the whole time, but we won't. Okay, so the business has a footprint in Vancouver, has for 7, 8, 9 years kind of thing. Of course, new ownership, new branding and all of that, but there's still that footprint that people know and love in terms of it. So, and there's now, the event has gone from 1 day to 2 days. It's gone from Vancouver to now the East Coast and coming into Toronto. Is there anything else, or do you want to talk more about those pieces in terms of where is Planted going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time before, as we sat there and said, should we do this? We knew that if we were going to pull the trigger and do this, that it wasn't going to stay a one city event. Like, one of the kind of conditions for us to buy in and do this was expansion. So yeah, like, there's so many different ways to do that. Unfortunately, I think the situation as we took over and started doing this, like right in the middle of COVID, it's the one time you couldn't expand. We just got shut down. Like, we were dead in the water on day one, basically, for over a year. And then there was just so much uncertainty. So we're still figuring out, like, we had some very well thought through, at least what seemed to us well thought through plans on how to do this. We're having to pivot and adjust on some of those, but there's still an overlying, like, we're expanding. Toronto's not the end of it. Where we go past Toronto, we'll have to see. We were in serious talks with Calgary at one point. Like, we've looked at various venues there. There's various other places. Ontario is a huge market. Like, we even we might end up doing like Ottawa or something else in addition to Toronto. There's Montreal. And one thing we're learning, it's interesting as we connect with others in the industry. I made a really good acquaintance who manages like dozens of these large events, the home show in this case. And they discovered like it's not only the major metros that work really well, sometimes it's like the slightly smaller, which wasn't really on our radar at first. And that's one thing we're considering more seriously. And Canada doesn't have that many major metros. And for that matter, it's not off the table. And we've always talked about expanding into the States too. Like that's not off the table. So we'll see. We're definitely planning to expand. I think 5 years from now, we're going to be in at least a few more cities. That's the goal. So hopefully more than two. Like I would love to expand one city each year. And if we can get some momentum going, I think that's entirely possible. But we'll see. And it's interesting because there's economies of scale to running it. Like when you have a small team, sometimes it's more efficient, I think, to run 5 cities with a team, because you're one graphics person, you're one accountant, you're one marketing manager can manage these things more efficiently when it's part-time this for one city. So we'll see. But we definitely have a desire to further this movement as much as we can, and to make it accessible to everyone within Canada first, and then we'll see where it goes from that.
Well, that's really exciting. So future growth plans, and the interesting part to your business and your event is the fact that it is really centered around the C in B2C, right? Like it's really centered around the attendee and the consumer instead of maybe like a Expo West where it's focused on business to business. And so you're right, like more need for that across Canada, more need for that across the US. Like a lot of these consumers get really, really, really excited about these types of events. And to your earlier point, there's always a need for more social wellness and connection and all of that. And so the more that we can bring that, the better. And to your point, if business owners and entrepreneurs can get through the last couple of years, then you can get through anything, right? So for those listening, in terms of what you got going on in the future, if you can get through the last couple of years, nothing can stop you.
So one more just real quick thing I wanted to add to that. So I kind of mentioned, like, we don't actually view ourselves as strictly an events business. We think of ourselves just as a platform for these businesses. Like, we succeed when these other businesses make a difference, when they sell their product, when they reach their target, when they so I very much think of us as a platform for these other businesses, but there's other ways to do that. And another avenue that we explored, like we specifically rebranded under Planted Life, and under that we're going to have Planted Expo. We have Planted Learn. We're starting to develop courses for people. So resources, right? Like if you're curious about transitioning into a fully plant-based life, or just incorporating more plant-based into your life, we want to start offering these resources. We paired up with people like Matthew Nagra and Jordan Bruce. They produced some courses for us, and we want to expand on that as well. So it's really furthering the movement, and I think the events and the expos are definitely the core part of our business, but we are looking to expand out past that as well. So.
Super good point. I actually wrote that down when we were talking about trends. The trend that you guys are after is giving real problem-solving people and businesses a platform.
Right.
So that's lifting people up, essentially. So the next question for you, no right or wrong answers. Does Planted support any charities?
Yeah, we do a few things. Like we had lengthy discussions about this too, like what we wanted the DNA of Planted to be. I've always been inspired by businesses that, like social enterprises, businesses that do what they do. They make a product, or they have a service. They're out to make money. They're not nonprofits necessarily, but they're out to like make a difference in the world too. Like there's a greater good. There's some notable examples, Tom's Shoes would be an easy one that many people would recognize. Yeah, so that's very much something that we want to do as part of our DNA. We're very supportive of nonprofits coming to our event, and we give them the booth at cost, which is what we can do. And we like to highlight them, just things like during our checkout process, you can donate to our nonprofits. Like we cycle through who we're highlighting, and then as they check out, hey, do you want to add $5 to whoever the highlighted nonprofit is, right? Things like that. For another thing, we did a VIP event with Rich Roll, who was our headline speaker at the last event, and we brought in a nonprofit to that event. We highlighted them. We took a donation from everyone there, and then we matched that as Planted matched whatever people donated, stuff like that. So we're trying. We very much want to increase that. That being said, it's not where I want it to be. The business isn't where I want it to be. It's been a rough couple of years for the events industry, right? Like the business is not where we want it to be yet. But that's very much the charitable giving, the whole social enterprise concept. I love the idea of everything, for every booth we sell, we're going to give a certain, number of proceeds to anything, a certain percentage of proceeds to something meaningful. So yeah, I mean, we're looking for ways to become more impactful in those ways. But we're doing what we can at this point, but there's lots of room to increase that.
Yeah, and I'll call it, you're being hard on yourself. You guys are doing incredible stuff already in terms of how you're giving these charities a platform and giving back. And that's like the events space was kind of turned on its head. I think the concept of how people give back in charities also kind of being turned on its head. Like there's a lot of good you're already doing by the companies that you're promoting and giving a platform to, and then that helps their charitable organizations and relationships, and it's all this big intertwined web. And so I can appreciate what you're talking about, though, from a very black and white, this booth, this many dollars, that kind of thing. But your kudos for everything that you guys are already doing in terms of checkout and the events and all that good stuff. So
support as much as we can.
Absolutely. And you guys are doing a great job. And there's always, and that's admirable, always room to grow in that sense. So the next question, you mentioned the 4-hour work week. Next question for you is, do you have any books, podcasts, or mobile apps that are on your phone as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that maybe help you with, I don't know, planning, mental wellness, business, finance, or any books, podcasts, apps that you would recommend to folks?
We could talk an hour about this alone. Yeah, there's lots. Both my business partner and I, we read a lot, we consume a lot. Yeah, I like what Simon Sinek has done. Some of his book, Start With Why, was really meaningful to me. I read that shortly before this whole opportunity came up. Remember, I talked about like how I immediately knew, like, yes, this is what like the why is there. And we use that term a lot in our internal discussions, like the why are we doing this? Making sure we're refocusing in on the why. He wrote another one called The Infinite Game, which is a really interesting concept. So yeah, Simon Sinek's books are good. He does like motivational speaking and that sort of thing too, but his books are good. I was personally quite inspired by, it's called Let My People Go Surfing. It's the guy who founded Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard. I don't know how to say some crazy French name. Almost as crazy as my name, but that book was an eye-opener for me, just how over decades of focused work, he never lost sight of essentially the same thing, like his why. Like he kept redoubling efforts to move the needle in meaningful ways, like environmental impact, just internal, like they pioneered some of these, like, maternity leave and all these other concepts that many of us might take for granted these days, but it took some pioneers, and in the industry to kind of really think these things through, and he was one of those. I'd love to meet him, but he seems like a really good guy. What else was there? A book I would recommend to everyone, whether you're a business owner or not, is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I reread that at least once a year. I've got notes I refer to. It changed the way I think about negotiations and interactions and psychology with, I mean, I have a 5-year-old who's a born negotiator, and we negotiate every bedtime. But that's a really good one. He was the lead FBI hostage negotiator for a couple of decades, I think, and fascinating book. Yeah, Tim Ferriss's works have been interesting. There's some good food for that. I feel like the 4-hour work week is a little dated in some of its concepts, but there's some gems in there too. Like, and then he did a kind of an anthology of his interviews and stuff called Tools of Titans, which was good. It's just like wisdom from a variety of different people he interviewed. And there's a few I could. Oh, well, the one I just finished. Sounds geeky. Well, my background, mechanical engineering. The book is called Organizational Physics, which I found fascinating, actually. He breaks down businesses, like how they essentially follow the laws of nature too. Like he talks about entropy and which is the tendency for everything to go to disorder. And within a business, you have a certain amount of energy you can draw from the environment around you. And first you have to overcome entropy, the tendency for everything to go into disorganization. And only once you've done that, whatever energy is remaining, can you focus on building and creating value. And it's actually a really good book. Reference that one again as well. So there's a few. Yeah. I loved Yuval Harari, Sapiens. I don't know if you've read that. He's a fascinating author. Just the psychology of, it talks about things like collective myths, which I think comes into play, this whole cognitive dissonance concept. And sometimes what a collection of people believe is more important than the truth, at least in terms of the challenges you're going to overcome and that you have to deal with and navigate. There's a lot of really good books out there. I could talk for a long time about that.
Yeah, you weren't kidding. Those are great recommendations. And I love the Black Swan group, Chris Voss.
Yeah.
You're negotiating even when you cross the street kind of thing. Like, yeah. I love it. Fascinating. So great. You mentioned some obvious inspirations to you in that last sort of recommendations related to books, but maybe in your industry, maybe in a different industry, are there any companies that you and your business are looking to for inspiration, whether they're global or local? Obviously, there's a lot of inspiring businesses that you prop up and give a platform to. But the question is, are there any companies that inspire your business?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Patagonia. Businesses like basically any social enterprise. The beauty of what Planted does is that's who I'm surrounded with. Right? Like I'm surrounded by businesses. I interact with businesses every day. We're out there moving the needle and making a difference and innovating in these areas. I look for B Corps. I look for just going back to this whole concept of the small decisions we make every day. Any given decision, any given day, you look back on it and it's not that big of a deal, but over the weeks and months and years and decades, it adds up. And okay, so you go to the supermarket and you're going to buy salad dressing, buy Newman's Own. They're all their profits go to charity. And if you're going to spend however many dollars on salad, so it's just the little things. Like you can support businesses. You need products and services in your life every day. And it's hard, right? Like sometimes there's a premium for that. For example, this hat, which I put our little bit, this is a Patagonia hat. And I just put our little Planted badge on top of it. And I could have bought a cheaper hat. But I know that at the end of the day, it makes a difference. And I would love, it's hard to set aside the extra funds that sometimes it's almost like you're making there's a like a do good tax sometimes on some of these products and services. And sometimes it's hard to justify that, but yeah, I think it matters. And I mean, I'm just so fortunate that all of the businesses that we work with, like I could pull names out of a hat. Anyone at our event, these are the businesses that we support and believe in, and are making a difference. So,
well, folks, if you're interested, make sure that when we tell you where to find out more information, you do look at like maybe the past exhibitor list, if that's available, or the upcoming exhibitor list, and then you can actually see, without Jonny being put on the spot of having to like pick the favorite child, you can see all the different companies that are inspirational. But those are great recommendations too, Patagonia and Newman's Own. And again, a lot of what you're talking about is behavior-based, decision-based, first principles thinking. And it's really, really fascinating, and appreciate the conversation so far. And we're already at the last question for you, which is always prefaced by saying no right or wrong answer. It can be long-winded, you can be modest, whatever your style is. Again, no right or wrong answer. What is some advice that you would have for business owners and entrepreneurs anywhere on the spectrum, moving from a job, becoming an entrepreneur, in the middle of their entrepreneurial journey, or maybe looking at buying or selling a business? Anywhere along there, what's some advice that you would give folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll circle back, or I'll at least add to some of the things I've already been referencing. Our daily decisions matter. I think we're tricked. Like the media, the ideas of the day seem to like want to pass the buck, pass all the responsibility. It's all the corporation's fault for all this, and because I'm just one person and I can't make a difference. And I so oppose that. And not to say that we don't need to hold the corporations accountable, we do. But our decisions matter, and collect, like now you go to the supermarket and you look at the dairy section and it's half plant-based. And 20 years ago, you might have been able to buy soy milk in a specialty shop, and that person buying it might have thought, well, I'm not making a difference, I'm only one person. But without those first people doing it, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? And I say that because we all have to eat, we all have to earn a living, we all have to put a roof over our heads and feed our families. But life's in a lot of ways, life's going to be a struggle. What type of struggle it is, it varies, right? Like a lot of us are going to have financial struggles at some point in our life. But you might not. You might have the struggle of motivating yourself every morning to get up to go to a meaningless job that pays well, but it's meaningless, right? Like, I don't think the point of life should be to minimize struggle or to minimize discomfort, or in my humble opinion, we need to minimize negative impacts on society and our planet and maximize the positive impacts on society and our planet. And so I guess what I'm saying is, don't let any illusion of like what it means to go into business prevent you from doing it. That struggle, especially for like a social purpose, like to do greater good, it's not going to be easy. Like, that's my advice, is be ready for a challenge and be ready for a struggle, and that's okay. And even if it doesn't work, like for me, I would rather know that I tried and it didn't work and I have to go get a job to pay the bills or whatever, than to never try. Like, when my daughter is my age and her generation is dealing with the problems that they're going to deal with, which, it's hard for me to even think about those challenges. I just want to be able to have a conversation with her and look her in the face, look her in the eyes and say, like, I really tried to do my part. And I could have done better and I could have done more, but I did care. And I think if enough of us do that, it matters and it makes a difference. And we can all be cogs together in the same machine for, making a difference, moving the needle. So I think life is struggle. So you might as well struggle to something that's meaningful, is my advice. So just find something that's meaningful and that has purpose.
Whew, I got goosebumps. You're gonna make me cry. That's incredible. Basically, yeah, you heard it, folks. The advice is reframe. Reading between the lines. Reframe your perception of failure, and actually try to fail more often, with purpose being the main driver, and then that's where you're really going to affect true change. And your decisions matter. You know, oh, I'm just one person, said 7 billion people who threw a straw into the ocean, kind of thing, right? So your decisions matter, and collectively there's a tipping point in there. Whew, all right, the floor is yours. If anything came up for you that wasn't asked or that you forgot to mention before we outro you, and let people know where they can find you online on Instagram.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity. I love connecting with like-minded people. I love being in this industry. Like, it's just, I'm continually inspired by the people who show up and they're not afraid of that struggle and that challenge. And, you know, they inspire me to want to further this whole thing. And I think together we can do that, and we will make a difference. And so, no, I think, I mean, come to Planted, come to the expo, and I think you'll be inspired as I am too. And so, yeah, hope to see you there. That's all I got.
And that's all we need. Anybody in Canada, anybody in the States, anybody anywhere, if you're interested in making an impact within the plant-based space in Canada, at least in Canada for now, get to Planted. You know, get to Vancouver in June, Toronto in 2023. It's a place where not only are you going to leave feeling better, but you're going to actually leave with actionable connections, meaningful, like-minded folks who are making those differences and have the ability to lift you up as you lift them up. So make sure that you do find out more online, www.plantedlife.com, exactly how it sounds, plantedlife.com. And you can find out more about these awe-inspiring businesses on Instagram at Planted Expo. Just how it sounds there, on Instagram at Planted Expo. Jonny, a real pleasure. Thank you so much for carving out some time for us today. And everybody, thank you so much. Maybe we'll do a round two because there's a lot that came up. And everybody else, we'll catch you on another episode of Veg Networking Canada. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, guys.